Hello everyone, this is part one of a two-part talk for today, Thursday the 21st of May, Ascension Day. The Bible reading for this is Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verses 1 to 11. Ascension Day is a major celebration for the church, but it's not too well known or very well understood today. The story is that the risen Jesus remained with his disciples for 40 days after Easter Day, teaching them and being with them. And then on the 40th day, he led them outside of Jerusalem and went to a hill. And then when he's on that hill, he ascends from earth to heaven, a cloud enveloping him as he rises, obscuring him from the view of the disciples, who we can picture looking up and craning their necks as he disappears from sight. To modern minds, this sounds a bit like science fiction, especially if you remember Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty, and not very good science fiction at that. So what's it about? What does it mean? What's the ascension signify? The first thing to say is that the ascension can't be explained scientifically, any more than Jesus' resurrection itself can be explained scientifically. Making sense of the ascension comes out of understanding Jesus' resurrection, and particularly the nature of his risen body. Let's step back for a bit. The Bible talks about heaven and earth, and we can say perhaps rather crudely that heaven is God's space, and earth, including the whole created order, is where humans and creatures dwell, their space. Often heaven seems very far from earth, above, if you like, in traditional thinking. But at times, heaven and earth are so close, they're touching. Think of stories like God walking in the Garden of Eden, wanting to find Adam and Eve, or Moses meeting with God on Mount Sinai, or Jacob dreaming of a ladder linking heaven and earth with angels ascending and descending on it. Or the visions of various prophets too. In the Bible, heaven isn't just a happy place we go to when we die that happens to have God in it. It's the eternal realm of God. Going to heaven when we die is far from the full story, and certainly not the end of the story, for God's desire is to see heaven and earth joined together as one, as it seemed to be briefly, at least in story form, in the Garden of Eden. So in biblical thinking, heaven and earth aren't two separate places, but two different dimensions of existence. One where God reigns fully, and one where humans seem largely in charge, though not very much at the moment, and occasionally let God in. These two dimensions exist alongside each other, so to speak, but meet and touch each other on occasions. And here's a crude example of that. If you remember Venn diagrams from school, in intersecting circles you can see, and sometimes that space where they join is big and sometimes it's tiny or even non-existent. Jesus' birth, life, death and resurrection is a supreme moment in time when these two dimensions meet. Jesus' risen body, still with the marks of his crucifixion, has come through suffering and death into eternal life, and this is the first sign of that fusion of the two dimensions of heaven and earth. The risen Jesus is the first person, the first being, if you like, who is fully at home in both dimensions. So the ascension, as described in Acts, is very much a limited mortal's attempt to describe the indescribable. The risen Jesus is moving from our limited dimension of time and space into the eternal dimensions of God's heavenly realm. And what that means for us, I'll say a bit more about in part two, so I hope to see you soon.